So I found myself in this predicament that my mind could not fathom. There's just, I had no way to frame what was going on. There was no model I could fit this into. Growing up in Belfast through the Troubles, I'd seen a lot of violence. I'd seen a lot of pretty crazy stuff. I'd been involved in a lot of violence, first-hand beatings from the British Army, riots in West Belfast that would make the BBC World News. I mean, this was a different planet. This was a totally different lane. I couldn't put words on this. I couldn't frame it. And what scared me even more was, the people around me who were my spiritual mentors, and my spiritual guides. They didn't know what was wrong with me either. And these were people that I had looked up to and kind of like almost put on a pedestal because they'd helped me so much. And, I guess my naivety, I put them on pedestals where I thought they had the answers to kind of all of Adrian's problems. And here I am, landed with what I thought was a problem at the time. And, I think it was a story of power plant. Queens, New York. I was working over there and we were building a new power plant. And casually one day, just walking back after coffee to our work area, I remember climbing over a steel beam that someone had put in the way. And it was wet, and I slipped and fell over the other side of the beam, and I cracked the base of my spine. That was an intense pain to the point where I think it was my chef Stuart brought me to the medic that day, and it was pretty obvious I couldn't work on. But I didn't know that day that I wasn't going to work for the next year. I think it was that serious, but I knew I'd hurt my back. And that would have been around November 2011 or 2010. Actually, 2010. It was towards the end of the year. It was towards the end of November. And I remember sitting at home, and there was a lot of pain in my back, and I thought, shit, is this going to be permanent, or is this the beginning of back pain? And, and it was up and down. And I remember waking up one morning and feeling something in my nervous system that I'd never felt before. It was like cold. It was like a damp coldness in this part of almost like my being. But looking back, it was my nervous system that, it was just there. And I thought, that's strange. Because I've always been a deep feeler, and I've done quite a bit of spiritual work, 10 years. I've had a meditation practice for close to a decade where, I'm not a window shopper spiritually. I'm getting up at like 4:30 in the morning and I'm meditating for an hour every day. And it's really, the dividends that it was paying in my life was, it was great. It was really helping me. But I couldn't connect everything together at that time. So every morning I would wake up and I started to feel this cold energy. And, it was almost like it was percolating. And it really got my attention. Really got it. To the point where I started talking to my friends about it, and they hadn't got a clue what I was talking about. And it started to become a little more aggressive. The energy, it was really kind of, it was pushing me and prodding me. And, now my ego's starting to kind of tune in what's going on here. This is different. We've never felt this before. And then, one night I was driving my car in New York City. It was a Friday night. And I think it was up around Lexington Avenue in the Upper East Side. When what happened to me in a split second has changed my life forever. My life has never been the same again. Where it was almost like someone unearthed this just like manhole inside of me, just opened it up, and this energy just gushed out of it. It was like a waterfall coming up a garden hose, and it shot right up through my body and right up through my brain to the point where, I had to pull my car over to the side of the road, and it just shot through me, and it unearthed all this stuff from my subconscious, and it all just started flying through my mind and through my brain. It was like the cavalry. It was like buffalo running wild, and I was petrified. I was terrified. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know if I was going insane. I didn't know if I was going to drink. I didn't know if I was going to get high. I just didn't know. Talk about feeling powerless. I hadn't got a clue. And I frantically started making phone calls to all my friends and stuff And what's ironic is no one answered their phone except one friend. And she was actually the perfect friend to answer the phone because she's a very open-minded person who has been on a spiritual path herself for many years, even though the stuff that I was going to talk to her about, she hadn't got a clue about. And she called me and, told me to drive to her house. And she lived in Pennsylvania, like 2.5 hours away. And I remember driving home and all this energy's flying through me frantically. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't. I remember going home and, packing a bag and like driving to her house in Pennsylvania. And for the next few weeks, her and her husband had to take care of me. I was in bad shape. The energy just wouldn't stop. It was like thunder and lightning going through my body. I could hear what seemed like wild animals in the jungle, like kind of make these noises and like lions roaring and waterfalls, healers, energy workers. I work with a Lakota Shaman. We've done soul retrieval work, journey work. It's all been so helpful. It's all been like a different piece in the puzzle of my healing. But I gotta say, the work I done with the horse whisperer when I went back to Belfast was kind of mind-blowing. And when I look back on it, what he'd done for me, he probably saved my life. At least that's what it felt like at that time. I remember meeting this guy in a parking lot back in Belfast and thinking to myself, am I crazy here? I'm going to meet a complete stranger in a parking lot who's told me to bring a piece of gold with me and also a bottle of bourbon from America. If you can really help me, do you have to pay or anything? He goes, no, just bring me a bottle of bourbon. I thought, Jesus, that's strange. Like, a healer wants a bottle of bourbon. All right, so I brought him a bottle of bourbon and I had the piece of gold. And he said, do you have the gold on you? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, squeeze it tight in your hand and close your eyes. And he put his hand on my head. And I don't know what he done. But a few seconds later, he asked me to open my eyes. And my whole energy had changed. And we had a little talk about what had happened, which I'm not going to really get too much into because there's a lot of personal aspects to that story. But I do talk about that in my book, in depth, what happened there. And, but I'm going to leave that out right now. And he said to me one thing. He said, when you get out of the car, you're going to feel like you're walking on a sponge. And I remember getting out of the car, and it felt like I was walking on a sponge. And he'd done something to my energy. I don't know what it was, but he'd done something to my energy where I felt different. And I even started to look different when I went back to my parents' house in West Belfast and stuff that day. And they were like, you really look different, and you look more, in your body and stuff. And your eyes have lit up again and stuff. And, and I thought, great, this is the beginning of the healing. But little did I know that I had so much road to walk. I really did. When I returned to New York, it was almost like it was as bad as ever. And it was pretty obvious that there was a process going on with me, and it was going to take a while for it to kind of cleanse or purge out of me. And so this guy Abdi Asada had kind of became my kind of rock, my pillar that I kept turning to. And he sent me to a couple of healers, a couple of energy workers that really started to help me. But it was actually my friend who kind of hooked me up with the Abdi video and stuff at the beginning that showed up at my house one day, and he mentioned a word to me that really changed my life. He said, right, dude, what's going on with you is Kundalini energy.
What? Guess part?
And I think I'd only ever heard the word once before. Kundalini. It's kind of a strange word. And I said, okay. And I started Googling it, the value of the internet these days. And lo and behold, there it was, Kundalini activation, Kundalini energy. There was a lot of stuff coming up for Kundalini yoga as well. And that's pretty popular in Western society. But Kundalini yoga and Kundalini activation are two entirely different things. It's apples and oranges, One's like a kind of exercise that kind of people do, and the other one is an activation where it's one of the deepest spiritual experiences you can have. And I think it gets mixed up a lot in the world. I certainly didn't get it mixed up, So I started to read all these symptoms and stuff online about this Kundalini experience, and that's what it was. I framed it, I was able to put it in context. But there was comfort in that. It was like, okay, this is happening to people. And not only is it happening to people, but like the whole culture in India is kind of geared towards having this experience. 200 years ago, people were like leaving their families and stuff and going off to live in an ashram or a monastery and, you know, getting themselves ready to have this experience, this like divine experience under the tutelage of a guru who's going to guide them through it and stuff. And here I am, this guy who's had this crazy life, you know, that's been kind of marred by alcoholism and violence and growing up in a kind of pretty crazy culture and just this kind of ordinary Irish guy. And this experience has spontaneously awakened in him. And I don't get it, man. You know, my question is, why me? You know, why did this happen to me? I mean, and then there's the other side of that too in the spiritual world, giving your power over to someone who you think had do something with it. And that's not right either. This is about finding your own power and stepping into your own power. You know, it took me a long time with a lot of mistakes. It hurt. I didn't eat the right foods. At the beginning, I couldn't meditate because when I would meditate, it would drive the energy wild and I wouldn't even be able to kind of contain it. You know, hanging out around negative energy and stuff. You know, I made all those mistakes. One of the main symptoms of Kundalini is you become really sensitive. It opens up the chakra system within the body. And that was something else that I had to learn about the chakra system. You know, that's not even recognized in Western science or Western medicine. I think we're a little behind in the world, you know. It's recognized in Eastern philosophy and stuff, but I think we definitely could do with an update because there's more people having these experiences today and they don't know where to go to have it validated and stuff. So I learned about the chakra system, these 7 chakras that go up the center of my spine and my body, right from the root to the brain, and how this energy pierces them and opens them up, and all these different experiences come out of them. You almost become like a human antenna where you start to pick all this energy and stuff up that you never picked up before. You can pick up dark energy, you can pick up light, and that can become so confusing, especially when you live in a city like New York. You know, there's so much going on here. There really is, you know. And that's some of the advice and direction that people, these Kundalini teachers and stuff give. You know, you're going to have to go off to the country or live in the woods or, you know, get away from everything. I've been in my Kundalini experience for the best part of 15 years now, and I've lived in New York City the whole time. Probably not I wouldn't recommend that to some people, but, you know, I didn't have options. You know, my career was here. My home was here. I just didn't have the opportunity to get up and walk away from it all, although at times I wanted to. At times it was horrendous, having to deal with all the energy and stuff. Eventually I had to go back to work as a steel worker. Then I would be working on these high-rise buildings, welding and stuff in New York, with this kind of Kundalini energy going on in my body and my mind going crazy. You know, I'm picking up all this energy on the street and in the subways. The subways was a tricky place for me. Going in there in the mornings, the energy was so dark down in those subways to the point where I had to stop taking the subway. I still can't really take the subway today. I drive to work and drive everywhere I'm going. And when I would get home at night, I would lie down in the bed. And, you know, I'd have to try to process all this energy and, you know, use discernment, what energy was mine and what wasn't mine, and how to open the door, and, you know, when this energy was coming in the front door, how to open the back door and let it out. There's so much to learn about this experience. I found contact with this horse whisperer through a family member. Absolutely knew nothing about the guy. I was so distressed, I called him up straight away when I got his number. And at this stage of the game, a lot of friends had been taking me to their homes, you know, pretty much babysitting me like a little baby because I was finding it really difficult to function. Still out of work. Couldn't have done my job at that time. And everybody's looking for help for me. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about the 12-step community. You know, even though they didn't have the answer for me, what I needed, they showed me a lot of love, a lot of consideration, a lot of time. And there was a circle of people around me that even though they couldn't tell me what was wrong with me, not once did they not believe me. And that meant a lot to me. It really did. Because there was a lot of people that I just felt totally violated when I told them my story. And I had this urge to tell someone my story. So, you know, maybe I'd give someone a clue or the right piece of information where they would be able to tell me, you know, this is what's wrong with you. This is what you need to do to stop this experience and reverse it. But I called the horse whisperer and kind of explained to him what was going on with me.
Oh, ew.
And he says, it sounds like you have a possession. I thought, Jesus, that's a nice thing to hear. I mean, what do you do about that? He says, it's pretty common, dude. It happens to more people than you think. He said, but in order for me to help you, he says, I'll have to put my hands on you. Do you think you can come to Ireland? Do you think you can come to Belfast? I said, well, if this is what's going on and you're sure about it and you're sure you can help me, then I got to come to Belfast. I remember going home that day and booking my flight and paying like 3-4 times what I should have paid for because I needed a flight on such short notice. I mean, it was Saturday and the quickest flight that I could get to Belfast was Monday morning, and I took it and I got way over the odds for it. So I had the whole weekend. And it was one of the roughest, worst weekends of my life. I remember going into the bank to get some American currency changed into currency for back home, and the energy came on me so bad and attacked me so much that I run out of the bank
Yeah.
and up the street and into the church and started hitting the door of the church. And the Monsignor's secretary came out, like, she was alarmed. What's wrong? What's wrong? I said, if you have a priest in there, please get him for me right back because I need to talk to him. And she said, okay. And she went upstairs and she brought me into this room. And the Monsignor came down and I explained to him what was going on with me. And again, thank God, he didn't rubbish it or, he'd heard of similar experiences. And I told him I was going to see this horse whisperer. And he agreed with me. He said, no, you got to go see this guy, man. Whatever help you can get right now, you got to take it. That's where you're at. He could see that in my eyes. And, he done a little prayer with me and got this, like, holy, I guess, some kind of substance for holy water and stuff. And he blessed me, and, I was willing to let him do it. I remember calling the horse whisperer that night again, thinking, am I going to make it to you, man? Because this is crazy. This is off the chart, kind of mental. And for a while, there had been, like, these internal urges and voices. Not voices the way I'm talking right now, but, like, intuitive voices that it almost felt like they were talking to me and dragging me down and trying to pull me back. And it was dark energy. I guess that's the best way to kind of explain that. It was like really dark energy. And the horse whisperer had said that there's, some kind of entities with it that you picked up here, you're in your psyche. And, he was a Christian man, the horse whisperer, and he told me, he said, say the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. He says, and keep saying it, because there's a piece in there that says, deliver us from evil. And I want you to say that. He says, you're also going to have to bring a piece of real gold when you come see me. He said, do you have a piece? And I'm not a jewelry kind of guy or whatever. I mean, I went to this jewelry store and bought this little piece of red gold. It was like a little gold cross. And I brought that with me, and I remember, like, going to the airport that time. It was in Jersey, Newark. They'd done a flight to Belfast back then. It was the night flight. And I probably showed up in 12 hours before my flight because I just didn't know what else to do. And I probably covered 5 miles that day just walking around the airport repeatedly because I couldn't sit down the way this energy was coursing through me and, the thoughts that I was having. And, one of my really good friends was on the phone with me and he said, do you have your phone charger with you? And I said, I do. He said, just make sure your phone is charged. I'm going to talk to you right till you get on this plane. And I remember, getting the flight back to Ireland and stuff and my family meeting me at the airport. And I had been through months and months of torture. I mean, it was horrendous. I would not wish what I went through on any person. I really wouldn't. And it was showing on me, the lack of sleep deprivation. Because I would get the night terrors every night. I would take melatonin and, chamomile tea, like as if I was going to do anything with all this spiritual energy going through my system. And I would fall asleep, and then I would waken up and realize that I'd only been sleeping for a half an hour, and then the night terrors would be on me all night. And that had been going on for months and months and months, and I'd started to pay the price for that, And it felt like my muscles were kind of like wasting away, and, my eyes didn't have the brightness. I have bright blue eyes. People have commented on that my whole life, but the brightness and stuff had kind of come out of my eyes. And my family were just like my sisters were crying. My mom was crying. My dad was crying when they seen me. I'd always be in good shape, when I'd go back to Ireland because I've been working out and stuff, and I wasn't, I really wasn't. And it's really awkward because people probably think you're crazy, but you're not. That's one of the most difficult parts of the whole experience. Is you're not crazy, but because other people aren't having this experience, and it's not a pretty common experience, people think you're crazy. But you kind of just got to get on with it, get through it, find your help and stuff, and know that you're not crazy. And so the next day I was meeting the horse whisperer, and my nephew picked me up and brought me over to East Belfast to meet at this hotel, and I went and got in the car with him, and there was this like older gentleman. It was. It's so ironic, He was an ex-British police officer in Belfast, and they weren't my best friends over the years. I'd got into a bit of trouble and stuff with them, and it's amazing how the universe kind of works. And this guy was in that police force, and he was this amazing healer. He was like this amazing, kind, old, gentle soul, and he knew who I was and where I was from and what part of Belfast I was from. I think that's part of the reason why he wanted to meet me in East Belfast and not West Belfast, because I guess he didn't want to go over into the west of the city where I came. He probably would have felt unsafe. And I understood that. So I went over to him. And I got into his car that day, and we talked for a little bit. And he said, "Do you have the gold with you?" And I said, "Okay." He said, "Squeeze it tight in your hand, son." He says, "Close your eyes." And I squeezed it tight, and I closed my eyes. And he put his hand across my face on my head like that. And he went quiet. And I don't know what happened. But he said, "You can open your eyes now." And he said to me, were you in hospital back in 1999, 2020? And I said, yeah, I was. 2000, 1999, 2000. I said I was. He says, "Were you going through a tough time in your life at that time?" And I said I was, I was coming towards the end of my alcoholism, active alcoholism. And he said, "Well, okay, what I got from you there," he said, "there was a spirit that latched onto you when you were in the hospital at that time, and it's been clinging onto you ever since." I gotta be honest with you, that didn't sound strange or weird to me, because I'd done a bit of a background check on this guy, and he could see these energies and he could see these entities and stuff in people. He could walk around the street and see this stuff. And that made sense. If you had told me about this guy 10 years before I actually met him, I'd have said, "You're crazy, you're out of your mind. This stuff does not exist. It's not real. It's fantasy stuff. I mean, crazy people, that's woo-woo, But here I am, I'm having this conversation with this guy. And he's told me some of the healing stories that he'd done also, where he'd taken kind of dark stuff out of people. And then he asked me, he said, "Were you in hospital in New York?" And, 2010, 2011. And I said I was. And that's when I went in on my back injury, the time I got hurt on the job. And he said, "Well, there was another entity that you were very vulnerable at that time in your life. And that's what happens. These energies die in hospitals." He says hospitals is a place where you find this stuff. There's a lot of dark energies in hospitals. These people die. They're drug addicts. They're alcoholics. And they're afraid to go to the other side. And their energy stays there. And when vulnerable people come into the hospital, they're at a low point in their life and their protection mechanisms and stuff aren't up, then he says they can get in through your psyche. And he says that's what's happened to you here. He says, "But I've taken both of them and I've led them over to the other side, so they're not going to be weighing you down anymore." And it didn't sound strange to me at all. It really didn't. Just looking in this guy's eyes, the difference in my energy when he took his hand off my head, and the brightness started to come back into my eyes, and my muscles and everything kind of started to fill out again. My energy had definitely changed. It had definitely been reversed. Even when I went back over to West Belfast that day, my family were like, "Wow, Adrian, you really look different," And when I get back into my nephew's car, he said, "Dude, I don't know what happened there, man, but I think it's good." And it was a difficult situation at the end because I feel like everybody's looking at me. Everybody thinks I'm crazy, but I wasn't.
And I
I wasn't crazy. It's a very real experience that I had, and I've spoken to people from around the world that have had similar types of experience. People have this idea that spiritual awakening is, unicorns and rainbows and, leprechauns and, all this good, positive stuff. And in the long run, it is, but, that's not really how spiritual awakening works. Spiritual awakening is wakening up to the deepest, darkest parts of yourself. And I can never know what that looks like. I can never know what it looks like. I think that was one of the shocks and one of the surprises that came to me on the journey. That I never know what it's going to look like. And it's changed so much as I've went along this journey. I've been on my spiritual journey for close to 23 years now. I've been in the Kundalini process for around 15, I would say. Although I think I've been with the Kundalini my whole life, but the explosions and the energy and stuff, that started to happen about 15 years ago. And it's complex sometimes, it really is. And I think there was a lot of depression and stuff and a lot of confusion that kind of came around that. One of the things that became evident to me really early on was that my life was over. The old life that I'd lived. And, I started to walk on this kind of spiritual path, and I didn't even really know it was a spiritual path at the time, but, in hindsight, I didn't realize it at the time, but, I was coming to New York to go on a journey that was just to change everything about me. I just seemed kind of, traumatized is the word. I think trauma is the buzzword of the modern day now. Everybody's talking about trauma, and I think people are more trauma informed and stuff now. But in the 12-step program, people weren't really trauma informed. Nobody really turned around to me and said that, that's trauma that you're suffering from. And I was to pay the price for that, for not being open to kind of trying different things. I wasn't really open to the idea of doing therapy and stuff. It wasn't until many years later where I was forced into a corner where I really had to start looking at the early stuff from Belfast. But there was a lot of stuff that was to come down the pipe before that. And people say, well, how do you know you have trauma and stuff? It's really hard to kind of pinpoint it and put your finger on it. I got all these questions and I got all this confusion and stuff in my life. And, the only kind of tools I had was, in around the 12 steps. But I started to get a real curiosity for spirituality. I started reading different books. That was another thing. I grew up an Irish Catholic, and my experience and, how that was kind of delivered to me. And if I look back over my life, I'm a pretty experiential guy. I think I've been kind of having spiritual experiences my whole life. I just didn't understand what they were, I had no way to frame it. I didn't even have anybody to talk to about it. I mean, growing up in West Belfast where, there's a lot of tough guys and paramilitary organizations. Everybody has this kind of tough external kind of front on, and where men don't talk about their feelings or what's going on. It's seen as weakness. And I mean, I grew up in a home that, it wasn't even. I didn't feel safe talking about my feelings, and my body was frozen, and I couldn't understand it, and I couldn't figure it out. I really couldn't. But sometimes I can't help but think about my ancestors. Like my grandmother, like her parents, like their parents. People who lived in Ireland right back to the famine and through the famine. Where alcoholism was a big problem even back then. Mental illness, all those things. Well, those people didn't have the tools at their disposal. And it's kind of brutal. I think that is brutality where, they've done their best, and a lot of them died from alcoholism and suicide and, different ways, had really barbaric deaths, and I got this opportunity here in New York to kind of not only heal my own pain and my own trauma and my own wound, but also generational pain and trauma I feel I've had to carry. And it seems obvious to me today that, I think there's a chain that runs right back through where epigenetics and stuff, and I think it's starting to become more common in the world today where people are getting to break these chains and do this healing work. You know, I'm a layman from Belfast. I didn't know I was going to go on a spiritual journey or a path to healing. I thought I was going to meet some nice girl and have some kids and have a job and wake up beside her every morning and go to work and come back and watch TV and follow my football team and stuff. But it's turned out so different for me. It really has. And I think that's been one of the most difficult parts of the journey is, you know, the ego being fixated on this idea of what Adrian's life should have looked like. And it's turned out nothing like that at all. So there's been an untangling of all that attachment and stuff that I've had to let go of. And that's been the biggest part of my journey is been letting go of stuff. It's been letting go of ideas and beliefs. Because really, the spiritual journey is a journey of healing. And I've learned that you never need to add anything into your life to grow spiritually. It's always about subtraction. And I think for the first part of my spiritual journey, the subtraction in my life was done from a place of ego where I kind of thought I was doing it. And that was until like 2007, 2008, when I'd been through my divorce. And I went through terrific pain. You know, the energy and everything that was coursing through my body, I didn't understand it. It felt like there was a purge. There was like a cleansing kind of taking place in me. And at times I didn't think I was going to be able to handle much more of it. I thought I was actually going to go insane, kind of dealing with that divorce. And it was like my life had hit me all at once.
Yep, I did.
And I made it through that. And what's ironic about that is, you know, the next couple of years after that were probably two of the best years of my life. I'd never felt as grounded as I'd felt. I'd never felt as clear-minded as I'd ever felt in my life without alcohol or any kind of drug or any kind of prescription drug or anything. I started to excel in my career.
I thought,
I became part of the ironworkers of the steelworkers union here in New York, and you know, I'd started a career in that, and that was a godsend. That was a blessing, and I got a promotion in that. I started to make as much money as I'd ever made in my life, and you know, bought a new car, moved into a new apartment, and you know, I felt that I was cleaning up a lot of my bad karma through the 12-step program, and the more I'd done that, the more it seemed the universe had my back and was taking care of me, and you know, things were falling into place greatly for me.